Yep, it's good.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Good morning. Alright, so we talked about yesterday, or last week, the fundamental side of Hector Melachas and Yom Tov. Which melachas are mutter, which melachas are aser, which is mutter. And we said that fundamentally there's two ways to understand the hector that the Torah said that we're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. One is that the nature of the malacha is different. The nature of the malacha is malachas. The only thing which is aser is malachas avoda. Malachas avoda means work, hard work. But malachas hana is mutter. And that's what Ramban says that when you're cooking, you know, do malachas hana. If you look in all the cooking, in the Torah, that aser malacha and yom tov, it doesn't say kol malacha leisasu, so it's called malachas avoda leisasu. So beautifully the Ramban is medayik that it's only malachas avoda, which is also malachas hana is mutter, and that perachom nefesh is mutter on yom tov. That's the fundamental yisoid. That's the story that the Ramban says in order to be matir, explain the heter of echol nefesh on Yom Tov. So only malachas avoda is asar, but malachas echol nefesh is mutter. The other way to understand it is that there's more of a need on Yom Tov to be matir. So for the need, for the tzorech of Simchas Yom Tov, for the purpose of Simchas Yom Tov, the Torah allows us to push off some malachas, that which will allow for Simchas Yom Tov. Those are the two basic malachas. Now, so we know you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, and even within that, there's going to be a lot of details, and we discuss which malachas are mutter, which malachas are aser. You're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to go hunting on Yom Tov, even if you're planning on eating what you hunt. You're not allowed to go fishing on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do tzeder. You're not allowed to do katsira. You're not allowed to go pick something off the tree and then say, well, I'm going to eat it. You can't do that on Yom Tov, and we explained primarily that malachas, which are either some level of, they're commercial to some degree, means they're made yom and rabim. The way you do it is in a more of a commercial way, is aser, or the malachas which are not being done on the food that you already have in your rishus, but rather bringing the food into your rishus. That's also not what the Torah allowed. So if you already have stuff in your cabinet, you have all the flour and everything in your cabinet, you want to go make bread, milisha ve'elach is mutter. But to go ahead and harvest a field and then go through all the process in order to make the flour, that's awesome. In other words, it's only with the ingredients you have, that's what we're not allowed to go ahead and bring the food into your shus, and that's why you're not allowed to do shlicha. Okay. But then that's what I'm saying, you're not allowed to do tzeder, you are allowed to do shlicha. Now, the place that becomes interesting, another yisoid, before we go into some more of the details, another one of the yisoidos of Hilchos Yom Tov is what type of tzorech do we allow these malachas to be mutter? Okay, and this is where things, people want to know about non-food related malachas. Are there leniencies on Yom Tov? Right? The most common shaila is showering. You're boiling water, but you're boiling water not for the purpose of drinking the coffee. You're boiling water, not for the purpose of washing your body. So is that permitted? That's the most common shaila about it.
Boiling water to replace the water that's already hot.
Okay. But the bottom line is
you've been using that water.
Okay. But that's the shaila of. That's the most common shaila. There's a lot of tshuvas written about smoking on Yom Tov. For example, when you do havara, but it's not for a purpose of eating. So you're not making a fire in order to cook. So that's a common shaila that there's a lot of tshuvas written on it. Carrying. You carry things which are not directly food related. You bring them a machzer. You carry when there's no air, we're talking. So you carry a machzer, you carry a talis, these types of things. So these are all cases where all of a sudden Yom Tov we're more lenient. Why are we more lenient? You're allowed to be more lenient when it comes to food. But anything non-food related, where does it come from? There's more kulas. So that's what we're going to learn this sugya today. And there's a lot of shittas in this sugya. But let's try to get the very, very basic, okay? So it's a Mishnah Beitzah Daf Yud Beis. Beishamai Omer. Any moitzien lo yasakatan v'lo yasal ulav v'lo yasef ha'torah lo shusharabim. Beishamai says you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. You're only allowed to carry food, but you're not allowed to take a child into the street. You're not allowed to take a lulav into the street, and you're not allowed to carry Sefer Torah into the street. So what should you do? Go lane where the Sefer Torah is. Go do the bris, even for a bris milah. Could be allowed to carry a katan, because the first one wonder why you're taking this katan. What exactly are you doing with this katan?
Shabbos or Yom Tov?
Yom Tov. And a lulav, you're not allowed to carry a lulav through the street. Zok Beis Hillel, that's Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel matirin. Beis Hillel says it's mutter. So why would it be mutter? So look at Rashi quickly. Rashi straight across from the Mishnah on the right side. Lo esakatan. So Rashi went out. Kol mili delav tzerach achila, because it's not for food. So it's not for food. So it's not for food. Beis Shammai says it's also. So now with John Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel says famously like this. It's like the Gemara. Tani Tana coming to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. The Tana said in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, "Hashochet oilas nedava b'Yom Tov loike." If you're shochet in oila on Yom Tov, in oila you didn't have to bring it on Yom Tov. You chose to bring it on Yom Tov. It's awesome. You get mamas. But what's so bad about bringing an oila on Yom Tov? Because in oila you don't eat. Shlamim you eat. You eat some of the meat. So that's geshmak. No problem. You can do that on Yom Tov. But in oila you're not eating it. So if you're not eating the oila on Yom Tov, why are you shechting it? So you get Malchus. Amar Lei, so he said to him, the Amar Lach Mani, who is the author of this statement, is Beis Shammai. It's Beis Shammai of our Mishnah. The Amri, Lo Yamrina Mitoich Shehutra Hutzal L'Tzarech Hutra Nami Shlo L'Tzarech. We don't say this concept of Mitoich. Mitoich means since it was mutter to do the malachas for Eichel Nefesh, you're also allowed to do the malachas for non-Eichel Nefesh. Beis Shammai doesn't hold to that concept, because they hold you're not allowed to take the katan, the lulav, the Sefer Torah. So what? You're not allowed to shecht an oila, because an oila is not food. So therefore, just like you're not allowed to do it, so you're not allowed to do shrita for a non-achila purpose. The Beis Hillel, because they will be like Beis Hillel, ha'amri, don't they say mitoich shehutra itzol l'tzarech hutunami shelo l'tzarech? They say a concept of mitoich. Since hoitzah is mutter for since it's mutter for Eichel Nefesh, it becomes mutter for non-Eichel Nefesh as well. And this is the shita of Beis Hillel. Okay?
When it says Rishus Harabim, is that Meduyak? It means
Yeah.
Rishus Harabim Deraisa,
Yeah.
or even Carmelis?
No.
A Carmelis mutter.
No, come ahead. Hoitzah deraisa right now.
So Beis Shammai would matter to a Carmelis?
No, but Beis Hillel would answer would be not to even Shram, it's the main point.
Okay.
So
Is it l'tzarech or is it l'eichel nefesh? Meaning if for some reason you had to bring the oila that day.
no, it doesn't matter when we have to.
Meaning because we're saying l'tzarech that he's not eating it.
No, it says mitoich. So let's read the words again. What's the Beis Hillel? We pass me Beis Hillel. So what's Beis Hillel's words? Mitoich since shehutra hoitzah l'tzarech, since hoitzah is mutter l'tzarech, which that l'tzarech means. It means Rashi says it means achasher yachal chalavish l'tzarech chalavish hutra nami shaloi l'tzarech. It's also mutter not for a tzarech of echal nefesh. Okay, so we now are explaining the shita of Beis Hillel. The Beis Hillel says since you're allowed to do hoitzah for echal nefesh, you're allowed to do hoitzah for non-echal nefesh. In the continuation of the Gemara says the same thing about a fire. If you're allowed to make a fire for echal nefesh, you're going to be allowed to make a fire for non-Eichel Nefesh as well. And that's Beis Hillel's shita. So now we basically see that the Gemara is telling us, so we pass it like Beis Hillel, and you're allowed to do any malacha which has a heter to do it for Eichel Nefesh, has a heter to do it for non-Eichel Nefesh as well. Okay? That's the Gemara. Now the question is, are there any limitations on that? Are there any limitations on that? So Tosfos asks a Bam Kasha. Everyone knows you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for the next day. You're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos, even. Unless you do the Erev Tavshilin. But basically, you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to weekday. So Frek is a very simple question. What happened to Mitoch? You're right, granted that it's not for the purpose of Yom Tov. I'm not benefiting anything from Yom Tov. But so what? But Lamaisa, I'm allowed to cook for non-Yom Tov needs. So I'm in the mood now to cook for tomorrow. What's the problem? Because it's not for Yom Tov. But you told me that I'm allowed to carry things which have nothing to do with eating. So Taisa says, you see from here, that it doesn't have to be the need of eating, but it has to be a tzorech of the yom. It has to be that there's some sort of need for it. If there's no need for it, then of course it's also. And therefore Taisa now starts limiting the heter. And Taisa is a shita, which we're going to see most poskim paskin like. There needs to be a very specific type of need in order to say mitoch. You can't just say, oh, everything's mutter now. Any malacha that could become mutter for achila, you're allowed to do whatever you want. No, it doesn't work like that. Tezis even asks a very interesting question. Are you allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov? You are. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to make cheese. What malacha is making cheese? Boina. You're making cheese. So for Tezis, you should be allowed to do construction on Yom Tov. Because since I'm allowed to make cheese, so I'm being away from boina. If I'm allowed to do boina, so now that I'm allowed to do boina for a chol nefesh, I should be allowed to do it even to build a house on Yom Tov. Because now boina has this loophole around it. Tezis and Shabbos, that's this kasha. So obviously, Tezis says you have to have, there's going to be a benefit on Yom Tov from the malacha that you're doing. Okay? That's the first step. Now besides that, there's a Gemara, okay, but Tezis is medayik from Rashi. The Rashi holds not like this. It's going to be a fascinating thing. We're not necessarily going to hold like Rashi, but Rashi seems to say that it's mutter across the board. Now once you say mitoch, it's mutter. Which leads the Mefarshim to ask a kasha on Rashi, that the halacha is you're not allowed to invite a goy on Yom Tov to eat with you. This is a common shayla, especially Pesach time. People have this shayla because people have people for Sidorim, and it's this one's boyfriend and this all stories.
Potential gayer.
What?
Potential gayer.
Potential gayer, right? You want to, they're learning to be megayers, and you want to come to your Pesach Seder, but the guy's a guy. So people ask this question all the time. It's pretty common. So you're not allowed to have a guy at a meal on Yom Tov. Why? Because you may end up cooking for him.
No, you're allowed to have them, you're not allowed to invite them.
What?
I think you're allowed to have them.
If they
not
show
allowed
up
to
after,
invite them.
and it's clear that you wouldn't have made extra food for them. Or you could invite them and say, by the way,
Come whenever you want.
come,
but
I'm not making food for you.
Right.
But you're not allowed. So why not? Because you're not allowed to cook for a guy. So Frek takes on Rashi again. According to Rashi, there's no din that you have to have a tzorech Yom Tov, so why can't you cook for a guy? What's the difference? So Tzitzis, according to me, it's good because you have to have some sort of tzorech Yom Tov. Tzorech of a cooking for a guy is not called a tzorech for Yom Tov. So you need some sort of tzorech need. It helps the Yom Tov to do the malacha that you're doing. Okay? The Gemara in Ksubis qualifies it further, and the Gemara in Ksubis says that the tzorech you need has to be a tzorech which is shavel l'chol nefesh, which is something which is basically a subjective need that most people, objective need that this is considered a tzorech for Yom Tov. It can't just be something which is subjective. You need this for Yom Tov. No, that doesn't work. It has to be objectively considered a need. And therefore it's something that some people like it, some people don't, some people want it, some people don't, some people look for it, some people don't. That would not be mutter. The Gemara gives an example of what's called mugmar. Mugmar is basically a spice of some sort of fragrance, and you burn it. So it's like an incense. So you put the stuff on fire, you're burning it out, and it gives a nice smell in the room. So Zakta Gemara, that's not called shavel l'chol nefesh. That's not something which is used by everybody. That's something which is used only by mefunakim to make a nice, and that's not mutter on Yom Tov. Okay, which all that fits into Tosfos' understanding of mitoch, that anything which is a tzorech of Yom Tov is mutter. But Rashi holds not like that. Rashi holds Then midiraisa, everything is mutter. Any malacha that you could do on Yom Tov for achila is mutter for non-achila. Okay? So,
I heard that.
that's very, very interesting. So there's a big machlokes here between Rashi and Tosfos.
Most of the yeshivalites smoked very, very heavily, and he answered them from doing it on Yom Tov. He said there's absolutely no tzorech on Yom Tov, and it's detrimental to your health, and it's not giving you any tzorech, and he answered them from
There's
smoking.
machlokes on this.
And
Chacham Avad Yosef has a true that it's mutter on Yom Tov. How can you have Yom Tov without smoking? What is that? So what's your Yom Tov gonna be?
that's what I heard.
You know,
That's what I heard. That's what he said.
I'm just saying.
You answer it just for Yom Tov or all year round?
No, for sure for Yom Tov, because there was no tzorech, and there was no tzorech Yom Tov, and it was
I'm just saying. I mentioned that
You
that's
can
a
smoke anyway.
I mentioned that that's a machlokes. Whether that, what's the level of, is it something which is objectively considered a tzarech or not? But okay, we're not gonna get into it now. But this is where the whole sugya of showering comes in, because the Gemara says explicitly that showering called gufa is not called shamal chol nefesh. It's not something which everyone does. Now, the argument on that for nowadays is that's talking about in the time that you had to go to some bathhouse somewhere, so people didn't do it on a daily basis, and it wasn't even for the Hamayim Am necessarily, and therefore maybe it was considered like a certain experience or something like that to go to bathe. But a shower today's day and age, does that fall into this category or not? It's a whole other shadow which we're not going to get into now. But this is the fundamental principle behind it. Now I'm going to read the Lashon of the Rambam. I didn't print it out, but the Lashon of the Rambam is like this. The Rambam splits it up into a few categories. The Rambam essentially goes like Rashi. The Rambam says that there's basically three types of malachas. There's malachas which are primarily for food preparation. For example, cooking, baking, etc. Those malachas are mutter across the board. Then there's malachas which are primarily not for food preparation. Ksiva, ariga, tfira, none of food. The Rambam says those are usher across the board, even if you'll find a case that it would help me for food. So now I like write a menu or something.
What about bacon?
Happy birthday on a cake.
Right.
What about bacon for cheese?
Right, and the Rambam Pashas said it's usher.
Interesting.
Because the Rambam is saying it's more a category thing. It's not a tzorech achila. It's more that the Torah is not to this category of malachas and not this category of malachas. If you understand, that's why I was mocked the other thing. If you say that the purpose of the Torah allowed us to do malacha for the purpose of eating, okay, whichever malacha I have the need for right now. But if you say it's more the Torah created a new category, so the category of these malachas are mutter, those malachas are also. Okay? So,
Would the Rambam still hold only Melishim at Ve'elach?
yeah, that's essentially the idea.
Because the malachas before that are primarily for food.
Well, you're going to define this food, because you're not being basic in food preparation.
Yet.
Right. You're saying, whatever the category is, that's the category.
The category is Melishim Ve'elach.
Right, the category is food preparation directly, not malachas hasada or whatever.
Plain thing.
You know? So now,
What
I
is
mean,
the-
right, you could say, building is for food, because that's my parnasa, and I go take the money and go buy food. At some point, everything has to do with food. Right?
It's not to be tough, yeah.
Right. So the Rambam is like breaks it up. He breaks it up into categories. There's a
What
lot.
does it do with like, cooking for the next day or for a goy? If it's the
Alright,
kind
so that's the Maggid Mishnah on Bet Yosef's question. He asked that question on the Rambam. According to the Rambam, basically it's like Rashi. You're telling me that the food malachas are essentially mutter across the board. So why is preparing for a guy also? So there's two schools of thought on it. Either it's dirabana, basically you're right, but anything which not a direct tzarech, we're not gonna. Which if it's dirabana, you can get a good to do it. It's very different. The other school of thought is that on those things there's a special pasuk for it. The Torah says lachem v'lo l'goy, so we learn out a new halacha not to cook for a guy, but really it should be mutter. It's a new halacha.
But for the next day, it's not for a goy. It's still for you.
Right.
Yeah, so the Rambam's getter is for you right away. That's the Rambam's getter.
No, some would say that the Gemara that says cooking the Gemara versus the Raisa is going in the other opinion, and the Rambam won't argue on it. Really, basically, it's mutter, but the Chazal made a hecker, so do Eretz Tafshil. But you're right. Now, this is everyone's questions. It's very hard to like, but the Rambam seems to break it up into two categories. Okay, but there's two exceptions, and this is where it gets very interesting. And happens to be the two exceptions are the ones that we probably use the most. So that and those questions that we just raised. And there's two exceptions, which are non-food malachas, which seem to be mutar and yom tov. One is the Mishnah we just learned, Hitzah. You can't tell me Hitzah is a food-related malacha. And yet, it's an open Mishnah that Basil is not there to do it on Yom Tov, even for non-food-related things. Number one. Number two is Havara, is making a fire. Like we said, for Mugmar, for making the incense, and the Gemara says that. So the Rambam says that there's three categories. There's food-related malachas are mutar across the board. Non-food-related malachas are also across the board. And Hitzah and Havara, these two have their own category. Why? Because Hitzah and Havara, even on Shabbos, really are their own unique type of malachas. That's what my Mishnah says. Because Hitzah is the only one of the 39 malachas, which really is its own little thing. Because most malachas, you accomplished something. Most malachas, you created something, I should say. Right? You made something from nothing. You wrote a paper. You cut something out. There was an accomplishment that was created. Hitzah is just a ma'isa. Nothing happened really. So it's called malacha gurua. So it's not such a great malacha. And the Torah has to answer it specifically. You'll find psukim in the Chumash that answer Hitzah, and you find psukim in the Chumash that answer Havara. L'sava'aru eish b'chol moish v'seichem b'yoyim HaShabbos. Yishalmi darshans b'yom HaShabbos, not on Yom Tov. We only answer Havara on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov. The Mela, Havara and Hitzah are exceptions, and those are mutar according to the Rambam across the board also. And that's the Pshat and Beis Hillel in this Mishnah. Which would mean that it makes a lot of sense why, if you go to the Rambam, smoking is mutar on Yom Tov, because really, making a fire on Yom Tov is really not also in the Rambam, essentially.
Which is an exception.
It's basically an exception. And therefore, the Rambam has this whole interesting way of saying it. And the reason I'm focusing on the Rambam is because the Goin says that the Shulchan Aruch passes like the Rambam. So therefore, we have to understand the Rambam a little bit because this is going to be the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? So, let's just backtrack a little bit just to get the Shittas. Then I'll read you what the Mishnah Berurah says. And this will be the fundamental principles. So last week we talked about which malach is yeah and which malach is not, and now we're talking about which tzarech yeah and which tzarech not. Okay? So again, let's backtrack. Tosfos, the Rosh, Rashba, Ritva, Ramban, almost all of the Rishonim learn the most basic way, which is malachas are mutar for the purpose of eating, and any malacha that is mutar to do in eating tzarech is mutar for a non-eating tzarech, provided that it's a tzarech hayom. It has to be a tzarech hayom. Which type of tzarech hayom? Shavuot chol nefesh. This is something which is Rashi seems to say no. There's a concept of mitoch, and you don't need tzarech hayom for it. And the Rambam is more like Rashi, that cooking and baking no tzarech. It's mutar across the board. Non-malachas, non-achila malachas are also across the board. And there's two exceptions. Carrying and Havara, fires, you're allowed to make on Yom Tov for no real reason. You don't really have to have a reason. Okay, now, let me just read the Shulchan Aruch here. Shulchan Aruch, in Tav Kuf Yud Ches, says like this. Mutar mitoich shehutra hitzal l'tzarech achila. Since you're allowed to carry for the purpose of achila, hutra shalol l'tzarech, and you're allowed to carry out shalol l'tzarech. He said, "Aval avonim v'kayotze ben." But if it's muktzah, you're not allowed. Tell me if it's muktzah not allowed. Let's say it's not muktzah, but I don't need it right now. It's also not allowed. Why did the Rambam jump and say, "Oh, the only thing you're not allowed to carry is muktzah things"? Why did the Shulchan Aruch say that? It's Mishnah Berurah. Everyone's medayik in the Shulchan Aruch. You see from here that he's going with the Rambam, and you're allowed to carry for whatever reason you want. The only thing you're not allowed to do is muktzah. But if it's not muktzah, I'll carry my machzer. Clearly it's mutar, but I need that for Yom Tov. I don't even need it for Yom Tov. mutter. That's what it would sound like from the Shulchan Aruch.
So it'll be
So-
okay to carry for one day for the next then.
Yeah, so that's what he's saying. Like, Chana is a little tricky because if you do it for tomorrow, there's some in this or even non-malachas, you're not allowed to set the table for tomorrow either.
Right.
So there's not even malach involved at all. So it's not, in other words, you can't do things which are explicitly for tomorrow. In general. You can't sleep now.
So you're allowed to do it for no apparent reason.
Right.
So then, why you limit it to one day?
It's like a light,
It's designed for today.
right, it's more like you can't do something explicit, yeah, but as long as it's not explicitly for tomorrow, it'll be okay. Now, the Gruss says, oh, Mechaber's going to the Rambam. That's mutter. Now, the Ramah conveniently adds a couple words. He says, you're allowed to take out Katan Lulav and Sefer Torah, but V'Kelim, on the Ramah adds, Hatzrichim Le'Ktsas. So Mishabur says, the Ramah is obviously adding in, there's always a question in the Ramah. When he adds in words, is he explaining the Shulchan Aruch, or is he saying his own Shita? So says the Gra over here, he's saying his own Shita. He's not explaining the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is going with the Rambam. That really you're allowed to carry out things because this is the concept of our Mishnah. Beis Hillel says these malachos are not Asher Yom Tov. And Chazal made some haggaras, very basic, don't carry out for tomorrow, don't do things like that. But basically you're allowed to do these malachas. And the Ramah adds through, no, you have to need it. What's the Rambam doing? The Rambam saying it's a whole different thing. He's not going to Rambam or Rashi. He's going to Tosfos and the Rosh and everybody else. They know you need a real tzarek. So it comes out from these three words in the Ramah that there's a major machlokes between the Mechaber and the Ramah in the concept of non-food related malachas and Yom Tov. The Mechaber will be much more lenient. Because the Mechaber is going with the Shittas Rambam and the Rif and Rashi, which basically says you don't really need a real tzarech, and therefore it makes a lot of sense when Chalavadi says smoking is mutar on Yom Tov, because why in the world should it be also really? As long as it's something, it should be okay.
So you're allowed to carry a talis and Mauser home after davening?
It should be mutar.
Yeah.
It's a Hachana question. In other words, but
You
let's
know,
say
like
I have a
Staying on a
ring.
on Shabbos, even if
no
there's
air.
Erev. Even if there's an Erev, like why are you bringing it
If
home?
it isn't there?
Yeah, why
You
are you
don't want
bringing
it
it
to
home?
get
Oh, right,
stolen or
that's it.
damaged and
Okay,
shit.
so if you have a reason to bring home, we can bring it home, for sure. Right. Right. So if there'd be no Erev, and you just want it not to get stolen in shul, is that enough of a reason?
What about so that Nashim could do the shake a little?
Yeah. That's
a little bit.
That's the Chayr Alter. Right? Sorry, mitzvah. But let's say, yeah, you don't want it to get stolen, you don't want to get lost, whatever. So, that would be much more lenient. Says the Bir Halacha, there's a long Bir Halacha here from the Chavetz Chaim. So Bir Halacha at the end says over here, he says, he doesn't like this whole Rambam thing. He doesn't like this at all. He says, "V'kol zeh hu l'fi shitas ha'mechaber she'ichriyah k'das Rashi ve'arif ve'arambam." The Mechaber says this. Okay, however, the emes psak zeh tzarchin. I don't understand how the Mechaber did this. Shekimat kol ha'poiskim cholkem al zeh. Everybody argues on this. Uliditu, according to him, haitzas avanim, carrying out things which have no tzarech klal, osir min ha'torah v'chayv malchus. It's also min ha'torah. Because it's not part of the heter of the Malach of Yom Tov. So you're back to the regular Issur. It's also not Torah. How can the Mechaber just blindly go with the Rambam when there's a lot? Most Shitas, his lashon is Shekimat Kol HaPoiskim Cholkim. Who's Kol HaPoiskim? Tosfos, Rosh, Rabbeinu Chananel, Rabbeinu Tam, Riva, Or Zarua, Rashba, Iter, Smag, Razah, Rash, Ramban, Ra'ach, Ritva, Maram, and
It's an all-star team.
what? And then he says, and to top it off, the Rosh holds that the Rif also means this. I mean, it's not even so clear that the Rif and the Rambam hold like that. So therefore, he says, Gama Prichadosh, and the Prichadosh is not sure that the Rambam holds like this. So he says, therefore, Loinishar Lanu, really, if you boil it down, the whole Psak of the Mechaber is based on Rashi and the Tosfos Rid. ובוודאי יש להחמיר ולמכור כדסך מחמיר, and therefore you should definitely be machmir, not like that shita. So this is a psak of the, and this is basically fully, it's pretty accepted that the ikar halachas, like the other Rishonim, that non-food malachas are only mutter if there's a real tzarech for Yom Tov. And you have to start getting involved. How much of a tzarech? Is it really a good tzarech? Is it good enough? Is it considered an objective need, a subjective need? And you have to start narrowing down exactly how far to take the heter. But if you would have read the Machaber Kipshutai, it would seem like any food-related malacha basically is mutter.
It doesn't even have to be Shabbat L'chol Nefesh for the Rambam?
Right. It doesn't bring that condition. The Aruch HaShulchan wonders why it doesn't bring that condition. But the Rambam doesn't mention that condition because he doesn't need it. The Rambam says you're not allowed to shower on Yom Tov for a whole different reason. Nothing to do with cooking. So you're not allowed to shower on Yom Tov because it's Yeres Machatzos.
Merchat Sois? What do you do?
We don't want you to go to a merchatz,
Oh.
like a bathhouse. Why? Because other things could go wrong in a bathhouse. So we don't want to go to a bathhouse, so they ask you for washing in general. But everyone wondered, why did you say that? Why did you say, because also to cook on Yom Tov, the water? Because he doesn't have that whole problem. According to the Rambam, it would seem like, basically, midarais or meikar adin, any malacha that's food related is mutter across the board, and cooking, and havara, making a fire, and carrying also mutter across the board in the Rambam.
Yeah.
But the Ramah is not like that, and the Bi'alacha is very vehemently opposed to that idea that it doesn't make sense that it's just mutter across the board because most come out all the poskim say not like that.
Rav Ovadia went with that Machaber?
I didn't see it inside right now.
Why is this sort of surprise? The Shulchan Aruch always goes with 2 out of 3, right? Rambam, Rif, and
I know. That's why I think he says.
That's why he puts the
That's
Pri Chodesh
why-
at the end.
Right.
It says
That's what he
maybe
said. And the
Rambam.
Rosh is not convinced that the Rif holds like this.
And
And
maybe
the
the
Rambam
Rambam.
is not convinced that the Rambam holds like this. So it's very weak.
even that's weak.
Right, that's what he's saying. Even the 2 out of 3 is not such a.
He
He
put-
said the only ones that are clear are Rashi. So you don't go like Rashi against the whole all-star, it's a whole list. That's kind of the Pure Allah. Right, without that, not so surprising, but the problem is that there's a lot of questions on this shita. Like, why is it also to cook for tomorrow? Why is it also to cook for Goyim? These things like make it a little. Even that shita can't be completely across the board, so it's not so clear.
Also, do you have to start defining what a real tzarech is, or you can come up with any tzarech?
It sounds like in the Rambam, which is in the Machaber, literally, you won't really like it. But in the Ramah and all these other poskim, which is what we go with, is that you have to really be defining the tzarech. It's not so posh.
I mean, L'moshel a cotton in the Mishnah. So if it's a cotton because he needs his bris, there's one tzarech. If it's a cotton because you want the mother to go to shul, it's a very different kind of tzarech.
Okay, so
That's
that's
all
really
right.
the question. Now, if we go with Tosis, we go with the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritzvah, everybody else. We go with the whole tzarech concept. So what type of tzarech does it have to be?
The Pasha is like any, like you need a tissue on your walk. You want to go for a walk, you want to take a tissue with you.
No, who told you to go for a
Don't
walk?
go for
Why
a walk.
tissues? Well,
Because
go
that's
take
a
tissue.
tzarech
What are you
hayom.
talking about?
I would have just thought that's called Tzarech Hayom. I mean, why would you need to have it even be a mitzvah? Just something you need that day. You're gonna go for a walk, you need to take a tissue.
So Tosfos wonders this question. Tosfos, on the page there, Tosfos said the case where the Mishnah said taking out the tinnik for your. The Mishnah says they still said you're allowed to take out a tinnik. What are you taking out this tinnik for? So Tosfos, it's very interesting actually. Once you mentioned it, I'm going to go through this, but you mentioned it already. So Tosfos says like this. Here, Tosfos says that you doing it. It's the 4th to last line of Tosfos. And Tosfos says, let's go to the 5th to last line of the Tosfos, which is Aval in the middle of the line. It's 5th line from the bottom. It says Aval Shalom Tzarech Yom Tov Klal. If there's no need for Yom Tov, Vadi the Osam in HaTorah. it's definitely awesome in Torah. Kigoyin, for example, oifem yom tiflachol, when you're cooking for weekday, umoitzi avanim, we're taking something with no need. The like a loy tzarech nefesh, the loy simchas yom tif. It's not helping you yom tif, and it's not helping you eat. V'chi pligi b'sham rizal is b'dvar b'she'inam tzarech ochel nefesh, but ikam ben tzarech yom tif ksas. There is a little bit of tzarech yom tif. Kigoyin, katan lemulay. So he says the katan is to give him a bris milah. The ha-mitzvah nikras tzarech yom tif. The mitzvah is what makes it into a tzarech yom tif. The lulav lot says by, the Sefer Torah liquor is by. So Tosfos says the Mishnah has one common denominator. They're all mitzvahs. So Tosfos not only saying it needs to be a tzarech yom tif, Tosfos all of a sudden getting very from over here. What would a person? What do you tzarech yom tif? What do you need to do on yom tif? Oh, mitzvahs. Okay, so even mitzvahs is mutter. That's Tosfos' sheet over here. Now Rabbeinu Chananel says, hold on. V'chein pirush Rabbeinu Chananel, aval lesam li pirusham. Tosfos argues on this what he just said, B'shem Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Chananel. The lav dafka katan l'mulai. Who told you that the katan is for a bris? The hu adin shaloi l'mulai. You forget the bris. The shari gam kein tiul. You're allowed to go for a walk. The ha'ash chanami the mesachkin b'kadur. You're allowed to play with a ball. Shakor and palota, a ball, right? The yom tif b'rishis harabim. Afagav the leka elatiul. So now she says that.
Wait, doesn't
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
isn't Mr. Brewer like very against using a ball? Like it's like on.
No, but he's saying, but he's saying you're allowed to use the ball because it's helping you. You're allowed to play in it. So Tosfos here has a very fundamental machlokes. Let's go with the shita of tzarech. Okay, you need a tzarech, and we have to define it. So now we're gonna have to start getting very nitty gritty. What type of definition is it? Tosfos here has two pshatim. Is it tzarech mitzvah or any tzarech tiyul? I want to go have a good time with my son outside. Let's go. You know.
That's the most.
But the Ramah
classic
said any
Tosfos.
tzarech, no? The Ramah said any small tzarech.
Yeah, so even the Ramah does not seem to say mitzvah. He says even if, so therefore it would seem, he says, Hagau mutar lischot b'kadur afilu b'rishis harabim. Avagav she'ena latiyu be'alma Tosfos, so he passes like the Tosfos.
So that means that a ball is not actually muktzah,
Right.
even on Shabbos.
Oh,
No,
why was Shabbos and Yom Tov?
easy now.
Don't
Easy
you
now.
change? I mean, you change what's muktzah based on Shabbos.
A raw meat is
because,
raw meat is muktzah.
because you can cook it and eat it.
Exactly, so here you can play
But
with
the
it.
ball you can't cook it and eat it.
He's
No,
not.
but you can play with it.
You can also play with it on Shabbos.
No, you not.
Indoors.
I thought.
Okay,
In your
fine.
backyard.
And so you don't have to come on.
No,
It's Tosfos.
Isn't there a Mishnah Brewer?
I think I
Unless
did.
you have an outdoor thing, something which is only for outdoors. You know, so you say, well, in my backyard is outdoor. Okay. My point is that the ball playing Tosfos is being matter Rishus Harabim, even.
Also, this halacha. I think there's a Mishnah Brewer says there were communities that were burnt down because they were playing with balls on Shabbos.
I don't know if Shabbos is Yom Tov. Is it the same thing?
I guess mashma the Tosfos not, but I was saying maybe they're only declaring whether it's an is or not, whether you should or shouldn't do it.
Where we were referring to.
Not coming. Starting to sound like a Rav over here now.
Yeah.
But that's so we have to clarify a little bit more in the Shita text. I want to give the whole background because there is a Shita out there, the Rambam, the Rashi, that really this whole thing doesn't apply. You can really much more lenient. But the Ramah is not like that, so that's what we'll focus on, and even the other Shita to see if everyone's like that. But in the Shita of Tzarech, how far does the Tzarech go? You see in Tosfos already, Tosfos is struggling with this. How far is it only mitzvah, or is it any Tiyul Ba'alma? Okay, so Mitzvah Shem will be details about next week, because we may be having like that Yachikal type of thing next Sunday. So I'll keep you posted on that. Okay?
Next week is
It's actually not Labor Day. Labor Day is after Slichos.